Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really dark figure, someone who almost perfectly mirrors a time of societal collapse and, well, sheer psychological terror. Peter Kürten. You might know him as the Vampire of Düsseldorf.
Yeah, and this is more than just recounting horrible crimes. Our sources really position Curtin at this kind of pivot point in criminal history. He sort of connects that older, maybe more localized type of killer from the 19th century
Right.
with the kind of killer we became much more familiar with in the 20th century, the self-aware one, the one who almost plays to the media.
That distinction, the self-aware predator, that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We're looking at how his desires, his obsession with blood, and the specific chaos of Germany at that time,
Weimar Germany, yeah.
how all that came together to create something new, a kind of modern monster archetype, the performative psychopath, someone who didn't just kill but almost intellectualized it, made it into a dark art form.
And to get Curtin, you absolutely have to get the time and place. So let's start there. Düsseldorf, 1929. We're right in the thick of the Weimar Republic. It's this period where, honestly, it feels like the whole country is just fraying at the edges.
Okay, let's unpack that because the setting really is crucial here, isn't it? Weimar Germany in 29. It's not a stable picture. The sources consistently talk about a nation just completely fractured by World War I.
Absolutely fractured. You've got the Treaty of Versailles hanging over everything, these
Yeah.
crippling war debts. It led to economic disaster. We're talking about that infamous hyperinflation, people literally needing wheelbarrows full of cash just for groceries.
And that kind of economic chaos, it doesn't just stay economic, does it? It bleeds into everything. It shreds the social fabric.
It really does. You had immense political turmoil, violent clashes in the streets between the far left, the communists, and the rising far right. The whole atmosphere was just charged with tension and instability. The sources often call it a state of moral collapse.
That phrase, moral collapse, feels really significant. People felt let down
Right.
by the government, the military, maybe even by old values that didn't seem to apply anymore.
Exactly. And in response, you saw these two extremes flourishing side by side. On one hand, this explosion of decadent culture, the Berlin cabarets, of sexual freedom. It was almost like a live for today mentality.
Because tomorrow might bring total collapse.
Right. But alongside that decadence was this deep, pervasive despair. And Curtin is just walking right through the middle of all this. He becomes this accidental symbol almost, embodying what one source calls the psychological ruin of an entire generation. His violence seemed to echo the violence of the times.
So the environment itself was almost an accomplice.
In a way, yes, it facilitated his crimes. Cities were growing rapidly, which meant huge crowds, but also, paradoxically, this intense loneliness. Dusseldorf was expanding, but with that came critically urban anonymity.
Which is a huge change. In a small town, a stranger sticks out.
Oh.
But in the city, Curtin could just blend in.
He had jobs, right? A laborer, a fitter. Yeah, he maintained a semblance of a normal life, but beneath that surface, he could pursue this horrific double life without anyone noticing, at least not immediately.
The sources talk about social fragmentation, too. People didn't know their neighbors. Everyone was caught up in their own struggles, whether it was survival or chasing pleasure. Trust broke down.
Exactly. And that breakdown creates, as one analysis puts it, the perfect breeding ground for a predator who could easily vanish into the crowd. It's almost tailor-made for someone like Curtin.
It's chilling. The chaos wasn't something he had to overcome. It was the stage he operated on. He didn't need the shadows. Plain sight worked just fine.
And you also have to consider maybe the public's threshold for shock. With so much political violence and poverty being almost normalized, maybe society was a bit slower to grasp the sheer horror of a truly random, motiveless killer in their midst. They were already sort of numb to a certain level of brutality.
Okay, so the environment provides the opportunity, the chaos. But where does the internal drive, the making of the sadist himself, begin? Let's go back to his early life.
Right, we have to look at his origins. He was born back in 1883, Mülheim am Rhein. And his childhood, by all accounts, was just awful, defined by constant abuse, incest, humiliation. He was the oldest of 13 kids in this incredibly dysfunctional household.
The father figure sounds central to this, described as a violent alcoholic.
Yes, and worse. The sources are quite explicit that he sexually assaulted his own daughters. This wasn't hidden. It was the environment Peter grew up in and day out.
So what does the child take from that?
He witnesses this, maybe endures some of it himself. He learns this brutal lesson early on. Power means domination. Power means inflicting pain. The strong prey on the weak. That's the model he saw.
And the sources point to a really specific, awful turning point when he was only 9. something that seemed to lock in this connection between violence and something else.
Yes, this is where he reportedly meets a local dog catcher. And this figure, the sources suggest, introduced young Kürten to bestiality and, crucially, to animal cruelty. This seems to be the moment that forged that first formative link. The act of causing pain started to trigger a powerful, perhaps confusing, sense of arousal or gratification.
So it wasn't just acting out, it was a discovery, a
Yeah.
psychosexual realization.
Precisely. He found out that destruction, that causing harm, wasn't just about releasing anger, it was erotic. It felt good in a way nothing else had.
He later said killing brought him ecstasy, right?
Yeah.
Not just satisfaction, but ecstasy.
Yes, he used that specific word. He described it as this overwhelming fusion, lust, rage, and this feeling of absolute control, all hitting him at once. This wasn't just him reacting passively to his trauma, he was actively creating a new internal logic based on that feeling.
Finding a way to feel powerful after feeling so powerless. If the world hurt him, he would hurt it back. And the ultimate power is deciding who lives and who dies.
That feeling, that ecstasy, became the thing he chased. It set the pattern. He spent the rest of his life trying to recapture that intense, devastating feeling, and it shaped every single one of his later crimes.
So as he grows up, this pattern continues. His adult life seems like just escalating trouble.
It really does. The sources describe it as a mosaic of petty crime, imprisonment, and perversion. He was in and out of trouble constantly. Reformatories, jails. A lot of his youth was spent locked up.
But the punishment didn't work. It didn't reform him.
Quite the opposite, it seems. The isolation, the punishment, it didn't lead to remorse. Instead, it gave him time, uninterrupted time to just sit and refine his fantasies, to build that internal world where these urges could grow stronger and more detailed.
That's a terrifying thought. The system designed to stop him actually helped him become more himself.
It seems that way. And by the late 1910s, this wasn't just vague anger anymore. It had sharpened into a very specific pathology. Clear patterns emerged. Number one, he needed blood for sexual gratification. The sight, the presence of it.
And he was stalking potential victims. Women, children.
Yes, the stalking becomes prominent. And the attacks weren't just about killing, they were about inflicting personalized suffering. But there's also this other element that keeps popping up, a fascination with fire. Arson.
So destruction on a broader scale, too, not just interpersonal.
Exactly. It suggests this desire for total power, total control over individuals, yes, but also over the environment, the ability to cause chaos and destruction more widely.
And it's this blood aspect specifically that leads to his famous nickname.
That's right. He himself claimed later, during his interrogations and trial, that he literally experienced orgasm just from the sight of blood. This was so central to his attacks, which often involved cutting or stabbing, that the media, struggling to explain this wave of terror, landed on that moniker, the Vampire of Düsseldorf.
It captures the public's fear and confusion, doesn't it? This wasn't a typical crime they understood. Not robbery, not jealousy. It felt like something older, more monstrous, unleashed in their modern city.
It perfectly blended modern urban fear with this almost gothic horror element. It stuck because it felt somehow true to the bizarre nature of the crimes.
Okay, so the predator is fully formed. The stage is set in chaotic Weimar Germany. Then February 1929 hits, and for the next 15 months, Düsseldorf is paralyzed.
Yeah, this period, the Schrecken site, the time of terror, it's infamous. The sheer scope of the attacks was terrifying, mostly because they seemed so random. The sources are clear. These were attacks driven by both sexual urges and the symbolic need for control through mutilation.
And the randomness made it so hard for the police, right? He attacked men, women, children, no clear victim type.
Exactly. No clear pattern in terms of victimology. Attacks happened at night, often in parks, dark alleys, anywhere that urban anonymity offered cover.
And the methods vary too. Stabbing, strangling, bludgeoning.
Right, which initially made it hard to even link the crimes definitively to one person. But the unifying thread, the thing that really screamed Kürten, was the ritualistic behavior, especially after the attacks.
Like drinking the victim's blood.
Yes, that's reported. And also, crucially, returning to the crime scenes later. This wasn't about checking for evidence or covering tracks. This was psychological. It was about revisiting the place of his ultimate power, mentally reliving the act, drawing out the pleasure.
So the crime didn't really end for him when the victim died.
It seems not. The narrative in his head required that post-mortem engagement. It cemented the memory, prolonged the gratification.
Which leads us straight to this idea the sources really emphasize. The sadist as an aesthete. He wasn't just compelled, he claimed to enjoy it on an almost artistic level.
Chillingly so. He was remarkably frank about his motivations. He admitted he was aroused simply by watching his victims suffer. The sight, the sounds.
And the language he used,
Right.
it's beyond just admitting pleasure. He called the sound of dripping, blood dripping, specifically a symphony.
A symphony, that single word tells you so much. It's taking this act of ultimate violence and framing it as a refined, sensory, almost beautiful experience. It's the absolute peak of intellectualized cruelty.
Not a messy compulsion, but an artistic performance in his mind.
Exactly. And he described the feeling itself in equally extreme terms. He said, "When I saw their blood, I thought I would faint from the pleasure of it." He's comparing the intensity of his sadistic arousal to a physical collapse, like fainting from beauty or shock. Their suffering was literally overwhelming him with pleasure.
That level of detachment, framing it as art, maybe that's how he could be so articulate about it later. You see yourself as a creator, not a monster.
That might be part of it. It allows for a certain kind of horrific self-awareness.
Which brings us to his mind. Because unlike maybe some impulsive killers, Kürten comes across as incredibly intelligent, articulate.
And eerily self-aware. That's a phrase that comes up often in the psychological analyses. He didn't really deny his urges. He didn't try to explain them away. He seemed to own them. He built a whole worldview around them.
Seeing his actions as ritual and rebellion.
Yes. He framed it as a conscious pushback against a world that, in his mind, had brutalized him from day one. It was his way of taking control, asserting power through these horrific ritualized acts.
And this self-awareness, this detailed accounting he gave, allowed psychologists later to be pretty specific about his diagnoses, right?
Very specific. They
Yeah.
identified clear paraphilic disorders, sexual sadism, definitely,
Yeah.
necrophilia, and genuine vampirism, that clinical term for deriving gratification from blood. He basically gave them the evidence through his own detailed confessions.
But it wasn't just about the internal pathology, was it? There was this outward-facing element too, ego, narcissism.
A huge element of it. What the sources call a narcissism of performance. He didn't just want to commit the crimes. He wanted recognition for them, maybe even a twisted kind of admiration for his, quote, art.
He needed the world to see what he'd done. He actually said something like, I wanted to give the world something they would never forget.
Exactly. That desire for legacy, for infamy. He wasn't aiming for a quiet end. He wanted his name, his actions to last forever.
And this is where we see him as a proto-media killer.
Yeah.
He understood, maybe instinctively, that power wasn't just in the act itself, but in the story, the terror, the narrative it generated.
Absolutely. He was laying the groundwork for how later predators would consciously manipulate the media and public attention. Think about Ted Bundy playing games with investigators, or Dennis Rader, BTK, sending letters. Kürten was doing a version of that decades earlier, using the press coverage, the fear as part of his performance.
So he shifted the paradigm. It wasn't the killer hiding in the mist like Jack the Ripper, whose power was in the mystery. Kürten's power was in demanding to be seen, understood, almost studied.
The narcissist needs the audience. They don't just want the pleasure. They want the act recorded, acknowledged as significant.
So how did this performer, this manipulator, finally get caught? It seems like his own ego played a part.
It absolutely did. His downfall was a weird mix of arrogance and this final chilling act of manipulation.
He confessed to his wife.
Yes, he confided everything in graphic detail to his wife, Maria Bunce. But it wasn't out of guilt or a need to unburden himself, not according to the analyses. It was calculated.
How so?
He fully expected her to turn him in. That was part of his plan. There was a large reward out for his capture, and by confessing to her, he essentially set it up so she could collect that money. He saw it as providing for her future, a final, twisted act of control, even as he was giving himself up.
Wow. So he's orchestrating his own capture, securing her financial future.
And ensuring he went out with a dramatic flourish. She did turn him in. And Kürten, apparently, relished the final act of his own drama. He stayed in control, right to the very end of his freedom.
And this control, this calmness, continued into the trial in 1931. Observers were horrified by it, weren't they?
Completely horrified, he showed almost no emotion. He was composed, articulate. He didn't deny anything, didn't plead insanity in the way you might expect. He just
Talked about the murders.
fluently, eloquently, describing these horrific acts with such detachment, such clinical precision, that people said it was like he was recounting theater, giving the audience the backstory to his masterpiece.
The jury obviously didn't see it as theater.
No. They saw the reality. He was found guilty of 9 murders, 7 attempted murders. The sentence was inevitable: death.
That combination,
Mhm.
The horrifying deeds and the articulate, calm explanation must have just terrified the public. The monster wasn't just savage, he was self-aware.
It confirmed their worst fears. The person capable of such acts wasn't mindless. He knew exactly what he was doing and why.
So the final act, execution. July 2nd, 1931, guillotine in Cologne.
Yes, the end came swiftly, and his final request, given the scale of his crime, seems almost mundane.
Just a cup of coffee.
Just a cup of coffee, a very simple human desire right before the end.
But his actual last words, or rather his last question,
Yeah,
that wasn't mundane at all. He asked his psychiatrist something right before the execution.
he did. And this question, it's maybe the most chilling insight into his mind, perfectly encapsulating that sadist as a seat idea.
What did he ask?
He asked, "Tell me after my head is cut off, will I still be able to hear, even for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures."
Just builds on that. He's not asking about God or forgiveness or expressing fear. He's asking if he can experience one last, ultimate sensory pleasure, the sound of his own destruction.
It ties directly back to his symphony comment about blood. He's trying to turn his own execution into a final aesthetic experience. He wants to be both the ultimate victim and the ultimate audience for his own death. Pure sadism turned inward, perhaps.
It's the ultimate act of trying to control the narrative, isn't it? Even facing oblivion, trying to maximize the sensation, own the physical reality of his end. One last unforgettable climax defined by him.
He absolutely wanted the last word, the final sensation, to be his.
And in a way, he got his wish for immortality, didn't he? His legacy is huge in criminology.
Immense. He didn't just vanish. His case became foundational. He really did set the template for that type of killer we discussed. The sexualized, introspective serial killer, part monster, part philosopher.
He forced people, police, psychologists, the public, to think differently about extreme violence. It wasn't just impulse. It can be calculated, intellectualized. He exists right at that horrifying intersection of lust and death.
And the cultural ripples were immediate. That same year, 1931, Fritz Lang releases his masterpiece, M. And everyone at the time, and historians since, believe Peter Lorre's tormented child killer character was heavily inspired by Kürten and the fear gripping Germany.
M is such a powerful film because it captures that feeling, doesn't it? The fear, the paranoia, but also Lang trying to explore the psychology, the compulsion, that haunting whistle. It really tapped into the anxieties Kürten unleashed.
Absolutely. And beyond film, Kürten's case became a staple in academic circles. Criminology studies specifically focused on vampirism, on sexual sadism, using him as a key case study. New categories of pathology were explored because of him.
And connecting to psychology, too.
Yeah.
Like bridging Freud's ideas about libido and the subconscious with actual criminal behavior.
Exactly. He provided this terrifying real-world example. Here was someone whose horrific actions seemed directly linked to deeply repressed, perhaps trauma-induced, urges and fantasies manifesting in the most extreme way possible. So this is really his modern distinction. Jack the Ripper, his power was in the mystery, the anonymity. He faded away.
But Kürten, he embodied something different, something more.
Yeah.
Modern, maybe. He was the killer who needs to be known. He craved the spotlight, the confession, the analysis. He wanted his art documented.
So if we pull all this together, what Kürten represents, based on the sources, it's this convergence. Eroticism, alienation, this almost godlike sense of self. It's the birth of the modern performative psychopath.
And the key takeaway for you, listening to this, is maybe the sheer calculation involved. These weren't just random urges bursting out. He constructed a narrative around them. He elevated murder, in his own mind, from a base crime to some kind of philosophical act, a form of dark creation.
His life, his crimes, his trial, even his death. It shows how terrifyingly self-aware pathology can be. How someone can consciously decide to take absolute power, to aestheticize suffering, and use the chaos of their time like Weimar Germany as their stage.
So what does it all mean? Maybe the lesson is about recognizing that performative aspect of evil. It's not always just impulse. Sometimes it's deliberately constructed, a tool used to gain control, notoriety, to shape a narrative. Kürten used his entire life story, including his end, to try and justify his sadism and make sure we wouldn't forget him. Which leaves us with that final thought. Considering how much he insisted on being unforgettable, how much he manipulated his capture, that final question about hearing his own blood. How much of that performance was truly about the pleasure he described, and how much was a final, desperate grasp for control over his story, control over how the world remembers Peter Kürten.
He arguably succeeded in framing his own legacy. He defined himself through that final performance more than the state or the psychiatrists could. A chilling success, really.
Something to think about. We encourage you to keep exploring these connections between the individual psyche and the wider forces of history and society. Until next time, keep digging deeper.